Depending on what it was that you were trying to do in the first place, I think you should focus on that idea. Because if you're just adding structure to this game just because you feel like you should, it's probably not the best decision. Hi there, welcome to... Hi there, welcome to Games Over Coffee Consulting. Game developers give me their games and I give feedback on their game design. My name is Devon and today we're talking about Gridlock Towers. This game is made by Flowave. It's a tower defense game where you can move your units while the battle is taking place, which is interesting. When developers submit games to me, I ask them, why are you submitting your game? What can I help you with? Usually what I like to do is to have them tell me exactly what it is that they're trying to do, and then I figure out, is your game trying to do this? And then if it's not, try to help them. But if it is, well, then I don't know what to do. So Flow, the developer of this game, said, I want the player to feel clever for thinking of the right strategy to beat a certain tough wave or give the feeling of a barely won battle. And this game does that. So, bye. Okay, there's a couple things I want to talk about. One thing is overall direction, and the other thing is some really nitty-gritty game design communication stuff. So she gave some additional comments, and that was, I am quite happy with the core gameplay of the game as it is now. Good, but I am unsure what the next step to take and what the structure it should have, as in roguelike and level or story, which is primarily the reason why I'm contacting you. Structure seems to be the thing that we're going for here. What kind of structure are we looking for in this kind of game? I don't think I've tried to tackle this before. I did kind of with Veggie Quest when we talked about how to write for games. With tower defense games, what happens with these games is they come in waves, right? So wave 1, then you upgrade your stuff. Wave 2, do the same thing, and it just keeps going like that, right? So it's this kind of stepped out process. So it's almost like an idle action game. Like I said in the beginning here, Flo, you have what I believe you wanted your experience to be, which was you've set up basically an arcade style type of tower defense game, and it plays like one. You even say in your game description that you got to wave 16, can the other people beat it? So you saying that tells me that you're pretty aware that this is basically an arcade experience. Either that or you're just a very self-aware person when it comes to creating your games. A structure can follow any kind of thing, and it's really hard to talk about this in general because really your game can be anything, right? It really depends on what the developer wants to do. For someone like me, but specifically me, when I think about making a game, I think about it from the idea level first, or the theme level first, I guess you can say. Actions in games to me don't mean anything unless I attach a meaning to them first. So to me, I need some sort of theme, and then I branch off of there to try to figure out what kind of game mechanic fits that theme. Now, I know that's not how a lot of game developers do stuff. That's the reason why I'm a designer and not a developer. A lot of people who develop games have an idea for a mechanic, and then they create that mechanic and then somehow come up with a theme afterwards. So that's totally fine. That's totally valid. So from what it looks like, you probably don't want this arcade style that you actually have right now. And if you do, then maybe play more on that, give the player a score for this. Like, think of the game Breakpoint, Attacks in Waves. It's an action game. It's very arcadey. It's where it's a shmup. You shoot everything and then survive wave after wave after wave, and you try to get the highest score possible. Really, there's no more than that. You get different enemies and then become harder and faster, basically, and that's it. It doesn't really have any progression other than that. Now, there's a ton of other ways to do level progression. If you think about Plants vs. Zombies, each of the levels in Plants vs. Zombies introduces new types of upgrades and new types of enemies, but each level has something more to give. So it's not just wave after wave after wave, an onslaught of enemies, and then you complete that level. Then you go to the next one where you learn a new upgrade, right? And the next one where you see a new type of enemy, something like that. Or you can be more implicit, kind of like Vampire Survivors. Vampire Survivors has this really cool idea of unlocking your next levels, as opposed to just continuing a level until you complete it. Vampire Survivors very much wants the player to just survive as long as possible within a single level before they introduce a new one as an unlockable, which I think is really interesting. It's kind of like a meta arcade game where you have the arcade thing in front of you, but then on top of that, there's like this unlocking kind of tiered system that's happening. So you still have the survive until you fail gameplay, but then after that, you have different levels of that survive until you fail gameplay. And each one introduces new types of enemies, which is cool. Another way to do things is to add a story, right? That's a very, very basic thing. That's something that they did with Portal. Portal was just a regular game until they added a story in there. Then it was suddenly this game about being trapped in somewhere, and it actually meant something to go through the different levels. So do you want that for your game? Do you want all of these things to mean something? Do you want a theming process to your game? There's that great sequelitis video on Mega Man from Egoraptor where he talks about theming in Mega Man, about how the whole gameplay of Mega Man is based on becoming stronger. You begin as a very basic novice, you lose to a boss, and then you witness someone else killing that boss, and you're able to become as powerful as that person. So there's lots of different ways that you can go about this, but the thing I want to come back to is your intent with this game. With your other games, it doesn't really seem as if you are looking for that kind of story structure or any kind of tiered system, which you might be, which by the way, I was a really big fan of your Unpress game. I didn't play all of it, but it was really hard. I thought that was really cool. So I want to bring this back to intent and try to figure out why it is that you make these games in the first place and why it is that you've made this game in the first place. Because I think that'll more inform yourself about how you feel about the story structure or the game structure in total. If I were to ask you something like, why are there not bosses in this game? I'm not saying that there should be. I'm just asking, why aren't there any? If your answer to that question is, well, because I didn't think about them, then I would ask, why wasn't that on your mind in the first place? And I acknowledge this is a weird question, but it's a question that's meant to get you thinking about why you made decisions in the first place. So when I was in film school, there was this question that my professor would say a lot, and it was asking why you did a certain decision. And when you first hear this kind of question, it can be very confusing and kind of irritating because you don't really understand yourself. So for example, one of the first picture projects that I did was to take a picture of something that inspired me and to continue taking pictures of that thing in more experimental ways. I found a trash can and I figured I was going to use that to inspire myself. I looked at the trash can and I took a bunch of random ass photos from like wide shots, and they were really bad, stupid photos. And then I started doing macro shots and stuff because that was the stuff that I really liked. But when I showed it to the class, my professor was really confused about the first few shots that I had because they looked like garbage. He asked why I shot those. In my mind, I was thinking, I didn't say this out loud, but I was thinking, well, because you told us to find an object to inspire us. So this is me logging that object. He said, why did you do this? And I had to think back and go, oh, I guess there wasn't really any intent. With that kind of mindset, this is what I'm trying to ask you at the moment. Why weren't there bosses in your game? Another question I would want to ask is, why didn't you include levels? Or why wasn't there a story? When you think about the answer to that question, think about what you were actually trying to do at the time. You probably weren't trying to create a story. You probably weren't trying to create levels. So in that same sense, I'd want to ask you, did you even want a structure at all with this game? And if it wasn't your original intent, should it be now? It can be fun to add on more stuff like a structure into your game and add a structure if that's what you want. But if that's not what you're pushing this game for, if that's not why you made the game in the first place, then I would just, keep going with the same intent that you had before, which was what seems to be an arcade experience. I played that tower defense game that was just before this one that you released on your itch.io profile. It had this very arcadey vibe to it, where it was just like, place your towers, set them on these rings, and start rotating them. And it was really interesting, but it was enough to just get me engaged, and then that's it, right? It was kind of a casual game. And that's totally fine. I think that's totally great for a game like that. For a game like that, is there a kind of structure that you want for that game? Because I really don't think that you need any. Is there a structure that you feel compelled to put into this game? And I know this might sound a little strange, it's just me saying, if you feel like it, do it. But that is what I'm trying to say here, is depending on what it was that you were trying to do in the first place, I think you should focus on that idea. Because if you're just adding structure to this game just because you feel like you should, it's probably not the best decision. A good way to think about this is the type of experience that you want to communicate with your player. Again, going back to one of your other games, your Unpress game, that one was segmented into different levels. And I don't know if this was part of the game jam that you submitted to, but I imagine that you created that game very specifically as different types of levels and not like one big world, because you wanted to present each puzzle at one time, increasing the challenge each time. So in this type of game, is there a structured kind of sequence that you feel like would be beneficial to the player? I don't really feel like it's necessary, but it would be really cool to see something if that's something that you want to do. We've already discussed some of the things that you could add. You could add bosses. You could add different types of enemies, which you already have. You could add different types of grid layouts, like different levels after maybe a certain amount of waves. Then the player unlocks the next level, like Vampire Survivors. Maybe each of these levels have different types of grid patterns that you can move your units around or something like that. Maybe each of these new levels have a new thing, kind of like Plants and Zombies, where you have maybe a new enemy or a new upgrade that's introduced in each new level. But again, those are structures that exist for that reason. There was one game, I can't remember what it was called, Kingdom something, and it was a very, very, very structured game. It looked like a game that had a story, basically. It was one kingdom that you were trying to defend, but you were trying to defend each town at a time. And that one was a very specific type of structure because it was looking at each individual town and providing context for the player for each individual experience. So what I'm basically trying to say is when you're looking at your game, think about what you specifically want the player to experience. If you want a tiered system, if you want to increasingly challenge the player over and over beyond what you have set up, and if you don't, to maybe just capitalize on the gameplay that you already have. Beyond that, I want to talk about some other stuff. One of the other things I want to talk about is the communication of design in here. Sometimes these games that are still in development just simply lack the polish that they need in order to communicate with the player. For example, like a tutorial level. You know, a tutorial level would be really, really nice for a game, but sometimes when a game's in development, it just doesn't have time for a tutorial for like the alpha or beta. So I'm going to say some things about your communication. You might be on your way to already, you know, designing to fix these things, but these are just things that I noticed. As soon as I launched the game, I have no idea what I'm doing. While I was trying to play this game, I found out that you had to press enter in order to do anything first. Once you've pressed enter, then there's a little selection, what looks like a little selection that comes around your little character in the center there. I have no idea what that thing is. After trying to practice the controls just to figure out what to do, I did figure out everything, how to do everything. But yeah, it is very difficult to find out intuitively how to move the icon by holding a direction, then pressing something to confirm that direction. Just kind of strange. It did work better on the controller when I mapped out the keys. To show them on the screen like that didn't really help. In fact, I looked at those and they confused me more. It says to move a unit, press space, and you press space and nothing happens. So trying to figure those things out by myself was difficult. Something really basic would be appreciated here. Something like just to show me that this centerpiece that I'm starting with is the thing that I'm trying to protect from everything. And I have to build towers. And in order to build towers, I have to bring up the menu. Those things I feel like should just be like maybe a pop-up box just to show me the pictures of stuff and just to hold a button to do that. It doesn't have to be a full-on tutorial, just something to explain exactly what I'm supposed to do, because when I launch the game, it makes no sense. Yeah, I guess that's about it. So I hope what I've said here was in some way helpful, and if you're not this developer, I'm looking for games right now because my queue is completely depleted at the moment. So submit a game, there's a link in the description, or you can go to this website. So check me out there. I'll see you guys later. Thanks for watching.